Sky News contributor Kosha Gator. Kosha, we will get to that phone call between Donald Trump and Anthony Albanese shortly, but let's start with the USAID scandal. If you want to know why the left is so committed to this cause, it's not that they care about feeding the impoverished or giving medicines to the sick. Those programs will continue. It's because they found a way to use taxpayers' money to push their insane far-left agenda. Here is Trump advisor Stephen Miller explaining it.
The USAID was a slush fund, first of all, for left-wing projects around the globe, like gender surgeries around the world, diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, crazy Green New Deal climate scams. It was funding an army of left-wing activists, these NGOs, non-governmental organizations. They get billions and billions of dollars, and they use that money to then infiltrate corporate America. Resettle, for example, at taxpayer expense, millions of illegal aliens into this country. This mammoth left-wing power structure, plus left-wing media, wasn't organic. It wasn't created naturally. It was funded by taxpayer dollars. And that is why they are screaming and screeching so loud now. It's because President Trump is cutting off the slush fund to the organizations that hate and hurt America.
And that's the biggest point there, Kosha. These movements were not organic. It was funded by taxpayers, unwitting taxpayers.
Yes, it has been an illuminating couple of weeks, to say the least. We've always known that the U.S. is running $33 trillion deficits. They have this ridiculous $7 billion and trillion annual budget that they can never seem to cut or shrink government spending. Now we know that beyond the spending, it is also these sort of insidious, nefarious actions that have created this whole infrastructure, as Stephen Miller said, of NGOs, who, by the way, the proprietors of these NGOs enrich themselves along the way. They take massive salaries. You can look all of this up when you combine 1099s with USAID. And then on top of that, they sort of astroturf, which is effectively what he was saying, these issues domestically and internationally. And it's really illuminating that the groundswell of support that maybe people thought we were battling with left-wing ideology, climate and DEI and all the rest of it, is actually not really there. There's no grassroots support for it, but it is top-down by definition, funded by USAID and even other organizations that now Trump is beginning to look into.
Incredible amounts of chutzpah here, using taxpayers' money to come up with policies and laws, agendas that most people actually do not support, and doing it in this underhanded manner. There's been very little transparency up until now. Now, Politico, they're supposed to be an independent news organisation, but they pump out a constant stream of anti-Trump propaganda. They received 8.2 million in US dollars, 8.2 million US in government funding. And that increased significantly in 2020 when Joe Biden became president. How are they justifying this, Kosha? Because they're not a public broadcaster, they're not PBS or NPR, and there's talk that their funding should be cut as well.
Yes, the public broadcasters, that's been a long-standing debate around the world. Why do taxpayers fund media for political news? By definition, should be objective. And now this is, again, insidious, where these are for-profit corporations. It's a little bit from USAID, but a lot of it is just straight-up subscriptions to their enterprise plan. Political Pro is the name of the plan, and it's something like $8,000 to $11,000 a subscription. And it's just running rampant, where there's multiple subscriptions across different agencies like the Department of Interior or HHS or others that are subscribing to this data. And I would add that those same people in their private lives, I would not be surprised if they share Netflix passwords with each other, but here they're subscribing to multiple five-figure subscription deals, which adds up to the tune of $8 billion for, again, an organization that has a very clear political agenda. Trump shut that off, and many others like Politico, which is fascinating to see the amount of impact he's having in just a couple of short weeks.
Oh, it's hard to keep up with the pace. This is one of the consequences of just implementing a raft of election promises, is that it can be quite difficult to keep up with everything that's happening. Let's turn our attention to tariffs on Australian steel and aluminium. The Prime Minister has had a conversation with President Trump. This is what Anthony Albanese had to say earlier today.
So it was a very constructive and warm discussion. Again, with President Trump, the US President agreed that an exemption was under consideration.
And when President Trump was asked about the conversation in the Oval Office, this is what he had to say.
I just spoke to him, very fine man, and he has a surplus. I mean, we have a surplus with Australia, one of the few. And the reason is they buy a lot of airplanes. They are rather far away and they need lots of airplanes. And we actually have a surplus. It's one of the only countries which we do. And I told him that that's something that we will give great consideration to.
This is the most conciliatory the president has been when it comes to these executive orders. Do you see President Trump bending on this, given the unique set of circumstances, the close relationship with Australia, and the fact that the US enjoys a trade surplus with us?
Yes, I wouldn't dare profess to know what President Trump would do on any given day, but those 3 points that you mentioned, Rita, are very unique to Australia. As he mentioned, Australia is one of the only countries that the US runs a trade surplus with and has since the mid-20th century. So that definitely is music to Trump's ears, because the whole premise or philosophy, which we do understand about Trump, he's been very clear about it, is leveling the playing field and having reciprocal trade deals where we're not running deficits with every single country. So Australia definitely ticks that box. There is also the defense relationship, where they're big buyers of US aircraft and military equipment and the things in the AUKUS deal. And also the geographic positioning of Australia as a long-standing 100-year ally in this region, proximity to China, all of that just really positions Australia very uniquely. So I would take Trump at his word that he's going to take all of that under consideration and look at the big picture.
Now, some interesting comments from opposition leader Peter Dutton. He actually took a very strong line against President Trump, saying that if he goes through with these tariffs, it's going to put a strain on the relationship between the two countries. Did that take you by surprise that he would interject in such a strong manner in this debate?
It is interesting, the specifics of that, but I sort of see echoes of it with Mr. Pierre in Canada as well, who's Canada's in an election year, and same thing, where they're sort of maybe trying to create some daylight between the other side and themselves, or show that they're sort of strong and they will stand up to anybody, even the leader of the free world. So maybe that's the extent, if I had to wager a guess of where Mr. Dutton was going. But I think everybody understands, whether it's Australia or Canada, the leverage is very clear who holds more leverage in that situation. And so it's better off for smaller countries that are allied with the US to work within this framework and this America First worldview that Trump has, as opposed to straight up posturing against it, because I just don't think that other countries are going to get very far with Trump's agenda the way it is.
Absolutely. And I do wonder whether Peter Dutton is worried about the left's attacks against him in this country, where so much of the media coverage is vehemently anti-Trump, and they're likening him to Trump on a fairly regular basis, saying he's Australia's Trump, he wants to implement the Trump agenda. And I wonder whether that's something that is causing some worries within the Liberals. It shouldn't. They should be able to counter it fairly effectively. But as we know, sometimes they get spooked, Kosha.
Yes, they do. And that's a playbook from the left now, to try and liken everybody to Trump. But I really hope that they don't fall in that trap. Don't fall into the frame that the other side sets. Just lead on your own merits and maybe agree and amplify. There's much actually about Trump that they could harness and use that to their advantage about, yes, we are pro-Australia. We believe in Australia first. That might be a better strategy if I were advising people on the right side of the aisle in other countries.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen it happen with Javier Milei in Argentina. He was called the Argentinian Trump. They've done it with Giorgia Meloni, called it a female Trump. And they're two of the most popular leaders anywhere in the world. So there are ways to counter this, and it can actually be used to your advantage. Now, let's talk about conservative activist Robbie Starbuck. He's been incredibly successful in lobbying big corporations like Walmart, Ford, Harley-Davidson, McDonald's to get rid of their DEI policies. This is even before Donald Trump was elected to his second term. And he's announced his next target is JP Morgan, the largest bank in America. Kosha, we are seeing this massive cultural shift in the corporate sector, and the banking industry, well, they're not going to be immune from it, are they?
They certainly will not. There's a few things happening where the U.S. government is now leading by example in these 2 weeks. Every DEI department across the government and DEI contracts with third parties and all of that have been slashed. So that sort of provides political and cultural cover, I think, to corporate America, where maybe even if they believed in it, they didn't want to cut it or walk away from it before because a mob would come after them. The second thing is it actually is illegal. The Civil Rights Act specifically and explicitly says that you are not to discriminate labor relationships and employment contracts on the basis of any of these immutable characteristics. And so I think they would expect that the Trump Civil Rights Department in the DOJ under Pam Bondi might even go after certain violations of that in the corporate sector. And Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, is a very smart guy. I'm sure he understands all of that. And I think Starbuck might just give him the push that he needs. But even without that, the tide certainly seems to be turning.
Kosha Gator, thank you so much for your time tonight.